Welcome back, and thanks for being with us here on Morning Live. Now, the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group meeting has been hailed a significant milestone in the global collective fight against corruption by the Minister of Public Service and Administration, Inkosi Mzamo Buthelezi. Now, the event was held in Cape Town, and it brought together member state delegates who deliberated on various issues pertaining to the global fight against corruption. And this event, of course, came as the Special Investigating Unit continues its investigations into various alleged corrupt contracts in government and state-owned enterprises. But to talk to us more about this, we're joined now by Advocate Andy Mothibi, who's head of the Special Investigating Unit. Advocate Mothibi, good to have you. Welcome, and welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, and good morning to the viewers of Morning Live. Thank you for having us.
Advocate Mothibi, perhaps a good place to start would be to look at the mandate of the SIU in South Africa. And of course, how does this differ from other anti-corruption entities like the Hawks, like the NPA? And what are the sort of cases or the sort of misconduct or corruption or crimes that the SIU focuses on?
Thank you for that opportunity, Sakina. In terms of the legislation that mandates the Special Investigating Work, which is the Special Investigating Units and Special Tribunals Act 74 of 1996, that legislation mandates the Special Investigating Units to investigate serious malpractices, maladministration, and corruption in state institutions. And more often we get the question whether do we investigate the private entities as well, that is the private sector. Indeed, those private sector companies and people that get involved in business with the state and do business corruptly or fraudulently, they get investigated. Now, focusing on the maladministration, malpractice, and corruption, our investigation, when it really picks up that there's a tender, for example, a tender that has been awarded corruptly or incorrectly or fraudulently, our focus in terms of our legislation is we've got a full mandate to follow the money, follow the lost assets, and recover those assets from those who benefited corruptly or fraudulently from the state. And I'll be taking you through, time permitting, through some of the recoveries that we have made. So that's the end-to-end mandate that we have, and we've recovered a lot of assets. Now, as we investigate, Sakina, we also pick up evidence pointing to criminal action by those who are involved. Now, by law, that evidence has to be referred to the NPA for them to proceed and look at it and ultimately make a decision whether to prosecute or not to prosecute. Our preference, of course, is that they should prosecute. Where they don't prosecute, we are interested to know why is it that they don't prosecute, so that we can work with them going forward, so that we pick up and include the necessary evidence. But what often happens is that the NPA would then rope in the Hawks in areas where they realize that there's further investigation that's required. We also do really cooperate with them and work with them, because we would be the ones that have investigated, so that we assist the Hawks and NPA to ultimately come up with a decision to prosecute. And in the process, we also find that there's officials that misconduct themselves, who participate and collude with these private entities to corruptly gain money. Those individuals, we take the evidence to the state institutions, to the accounting officers and accounting authorities, so that they can take disciplinary action, right? And we support the disciplinary action. Of course, our preference again is that that should be acted upon, so that the officials can be disciplined and be taken out of the system. We also refer matters to other regulatory authorities where we find that there's tax infractions. We refer it to SARS, Competition Commission, and we referred a lot of matters during the COVID-19 investigations to SAPRA and the others. But what really differentiates us from other law enforcement agencies is that we also do really zoom into systemic investigations, and we look into systemic weaknesses, and we work with the state institutions where we've investigated. We've got a dedicated team at SIU that really looks at the improvement of the administration, implementing required controls, and as we are now really implementing the National Corruption Prevention and Risk Management Framework. So that's in brief our mandate, Sakina. Thank you.
Advocate Mothibi, just drawing on the last voice note that came through in response to our question of the day, the caller there says what bothers him is the fact that he doesn't see people being prosecuted. So when we look at the efficacy of the SIU in terms of recovering stolen funds, stolen public funds, the SIU, I think if I were to ask you, you would say that you've been quite successful in this regard. But as you say, you then refer some of these matters. So if you are recovering funds or other stolen assets, how is it then that the people from whom you recover that are still on free foot? They are still roaming in the public, and therefore it kind of sends a message to the public that this effort is not a successful one.
Indeed. Well captured, Sakina. We've had comments from some of the members of the public saying we will recover these assets from money from the corrupt. But once we've recovered, they will be without these assets and money, but they will walk the streets again free. But what happens is that they morph and they resurface one way or another in other companies and so on, and that really doesn't mete out full justice. So we are really working with our colleagues at NPA and with the Hawks to really ensure that we bring out some of these prosecutions and so on, so that the public can see that the criminal part of the consequence management is also gaining traction. But Sakina, there are some cases that I can point to that there is prosecution processes in ESCOM, for example. There's senior management that are in court at the moment, facing charges from some of the contracts that they've facilitated, that they've colluded with the private sector companies. There are other prosecution in other municipalities. But of course, overall, the observation is that those matters are required to be taken to their logical conclusion, such that there is prosecution, conviction, and imprisonment. That's what the public is calling for, and we're working. Yes. If
I may just interject there, Advocate Mothibi, I think what the public is also bemoaning is the lack of high-profile prosecutions. Yeah. You take, for example, the Zondo Commission matters. You take the NLC, the National Lotteries Commission matters. Rather high-profile people that have been fingered in those instances where the SIU has recovered some assets, and however, we don't hear of people being arrested and imprisoned, even though if you are recovering stolen funds and assets, surely it means that some wrongdoing occurred. Some crime has occurred in that instance. So you're recovering the assets, but people are just walking free.
True that, Sakina, and we really need to lift the bar. We need to lift the bar there, ensure that we really support NPA with the required evidence so that they can take the decisions to prosecute. You're correct. I mean, in ESCOM, for example, to date, there's assets and monies that have been recovered to the tune of more than 2 billion, and there are still cases in the civil courts. Remember, we recover monies in the civil courts, and these days, the recoveries have really been propelled by the president establishing the special tribunal, right? So perhaps we need to look at even the same approach in the criminal justice space, that perhaps we require specialized corruption court cases where these matters can be really pushed through speedily. So in Eskom, I mean, more than 2 billion recovered and returned to Eskom, and we have also recovered from international companies such as the ABB. Those many in the public would say, blue chip companies are left, untouched. We have touched them. No one is left untouched in the recovery process. There's other examples that I can give at National Lottery, as you have correctly mentioned. The monies that were supposed really to benefit the vulnerable have been used for nefarious ends, personal ends, buying luxury properties and cars. We've recovered all of those, right? And we want to make sure, and I've come back to the G20 priorities. We've been discussing here that all these assets that have been recovered, state parties have to make sure that there's legislation that makes sure that these assets that are recovered are used for public good, right? So we've been doing that, and we believe that in taking this money back, assets back to the fiscus, they'll be used for public good. In Transnet, we've recovered, the cases relating to the locomotives, right? In the locomotives, we are in court with all those international companies to recover about 52 billion. We have recovered to date money in the bank more than 2 billion. NSFAS, right? In this education sector, you would be aware, right? Those students who benefited and unduly, right? And we are always really on record saying we don't deliberately want to criminalize students, but where we find that there is corruption that took place, we are enjoined, Sakina, to recover. And of course, criminal action should follow. That's the point that the public is making.
But it's not following. It's not following. And I think that is the crux of the matter. Yes. That is the problem
that's the
here.
Concern.
And,
that's the concern. Yeah.
Then we look at the gathering that took place this week, the G20 Working Group on anti-corruption. Yes. And how important is it then? Because you mentioned some international companies that have also been complicit in some of the corrupt activity at South African state-owned entities. So how important is it to have that international cooperation in addressing the scourge of corruption, not just within our government, but internationally?
Thank you, Sakina. I'll come to that quickly. I know time is of the essence. Just this morning, as you were going on with the morning live, I saw the newspaper reviews. On the front page of the Business Day is the REF CEO, and we really applaud him for taking a stance. And we are investigating there as well. As you know, that we were found wrongdoing on the part of lawyers and attorneys that are fleecing public money. We've recovered more than 300 million in the RAF space, and we continue to work with RAF. Really, that's good. We want to see that. We're doing the same on the health side, where we have found lawyers really implicated in the medical legals, where they are misrepresenting children, claiming that the children are born with cerebral palsy when they are not. So the word is out there. We are relentless in making sure that all those who are implicated will be held to account. Back to G20. G20 is a very important platform, Sakina, to make sure that state parties really work together, collaborate, cooperate, and we have had nothing other than that during this meeting. All the attendance was 100%, and some of the state parties there, including the United States representative, were really saying, because we worked with them in this ABB case, including that we get evidence that implicates them internationally, even in the USA jurisdiction. So the state parties were all present, including other international bodies like the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, OECD, United Nations Development Program, were here, and the African Union, because we want the African agenda to be inculcated in our outcomes of this G20. We've got 4 priorities as the country. during the South African presidency and the chair of the G20. We are co-chairing, and Brazil is co-chairing with us this G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. The 4 priorities quickly. Number 1, we want to see the improvement in really managing in the public service professionalization, strengthening public service by improving transparency, integrity, and all other due diligence processes relating to recruitment in the public sector, vetting, and integrity checks, and the relevant articles in the United Nations Convention Against Corruption are applicable. In this one, Article 7, Article 8, and Article 9, which includes abuse of office. So and we are glad that our head of the School of Government was here, Professor Busani Ngaweni, facilitating that service. So this is really the whole of government approach. So the second priority is the recovery of assets. Here, in fact, in all the priorities, we've got really a collective consensus that we need to ensure that they are implemented and implemented successfully. On the recovery of asset side, Sakina, you would know that most of the state parties really are calling out for international cooperation. We've had some of the assets stolen. For example, in our investigation at Dinel, we've revealed that stolen IP has been taken to outside of the country. So those are kind of examples that we are saying, state parties, we need to make sure that we collaborate, return the stolen assets, so that those who are corrupt and fraudulent, they should know that there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide the assets. Our colleagues from Switzerland, they really were vocal in saying we need to put in place measures. You would know that, in the past, monies were taken to banks in the Switzerland and so on. It's no longer the case. We were really pleased to hear the Swiss pronouncing as they were doing. The third priority is the inclusion of whole of society, business, labor, youth, women, in the fight against corruption. We have pronounced it as a country in our national anti-corruption strategy, and we would like to see that strengthened, including everyone. No one should be left behind, as our president often says,
Advocate
in
Mothibi,
the fight against corruption. And the last one is whistleblower protection.
And to that, the Babita Deokaran case, we literally have 30 seconds. Just an update, that PPE corruption, there was the digital vibes issue, there was the Babita Deokaran case where some people were arrested. What is the latest on that in 30 seconds or less, please?
In 30 seconds, I've spoken to my colleague, the head of the Hawks. They are really hard at work to ensure that, the so-called masterminds. Remember, there were arrests being made. The so-called masterminds, really, we have to work hard to make sure that we bring them up and bring them to book. I'm really glad that as we speak, there's a whistleblower event being hosted by the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council appointed by the President, chaired by Professor Katalia. There's a whistleblower event happening here in Cape Town. Amongst others, we are going, and this is what we discussed in the priorities. Professor Katalia was here. We are going to really say, what are the measures that we need to put in place to make sure that when the witnesses and whistleblowers come forward with the knowledge that they will be protected, Sakina. We depend on whistleblowers for our cases.
But we need to protect them. Story for another day. Advocate Andy Mothibi, thanks so much, head of the Special Investigating Unit, talking to us about the SIU's work and the outcome of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group meeting that ended yesterday in Cape Town.